when I was in Glenwood Springs, I made a video of like my TAC setup, and I forgot to push the record button, so I basically just talked to the camera without it recording for like an hour. So I'm gonna do that again, which is fine because I've got the Bambreeze Malt Shake IPA from By All Means, 6.5% ABV, and I've got the 16 ounce. So a malt shake IPA. Kevin with Matrix Targets and I, and an NHL player named Brett Burns, we did a little bet that Brett could or couldn't knock over one of the Matrix Targets with a slap shot. I bet that he could, and that puny man let me down because he did not. Oh, look at that. I mean, you guys watched what I did with that pour. Do you feel like this is a good pour, or do you feel like this is, like, I feel like that was a good pour and I don't know what's happened. So the bow that I decided to take was different than the one that I was hoping to take. Honestly, I wanted to take the PSE, but it's 80 pounds, and I bought 300 spine arrows, and I put 150 grains out front, and it wouldn't do it. Like, it just couldn't handle it. It was the dynamic spine of these arrows, which we'll talk about a little bit. It was just breaking them down too much, and I couldn't get good paper tears even right off the bat. Like, I monkeyed with everything. I switched rests. I did all sorts of stuff that I didn't need to do because I knew that I was pushing the arrows too far. So I went with the Venom 33 at 72 pounds, which is right on the edge probably of exactly where I need to be with this type of setup. I have really liked this bow so far this year. The grip is interesting. I'm still kind of getting used to it. I'm not used to like the kind of harder plastic contoured grip. But I'm liking the bow. Like, I feel pretty confident with it, and I think overall it's a platform that I'm really going to enjoy hunting with this year. Let's just start from the bottom. 15-inch cutter stabilizer. I've got 4 ounces of weight out front here, and then an 8-inch bar out back with 9 ounces of weight. Truthfully, I haven't played with the stabilizer setup as much as I probably could have here. Generally, I'm more like 9 and 3, or maybe a hair less, but the balance feels pretty good. I think this is, the Hamskea Hybrid Hunter Pro Trinity rest on here. The only issue that I have with this is it's got this back brace on the aluminum riser back behind the actual Trinity, and it's super tight. If you want to be able to kind of move the rest forward and back, the Trinity doesn't really give you a lot of options because it's a big bulky rest that's right in here that the bracing on the Venom kind of prevents. The nice thing is it also provides a lot of like safety. So it feels like something where it's not going to get messed up. Like, this feels like it's going to be super safe, and I had no issues with that. No slippage, no issues. Another thing that was kind of new for me is the Excel Picatinny. I think this is the Landslide. AccuStat 2. They've got like a bunch of different series. It's basically a 5-pin slider, and it's got this cool little hood that you can kind of move back and forth over if you want to try to adjust the amount of light that's making it into the actual fibers. The pins are all 19th thousandths, so they're a little bit fatter. Like a 10 thousandths is what I really prefer for those last couple pins, so that as you're getting out farther, having those smaller pins so that when you draw up, it doesn't just, look like a giant mini basketball that's completely covering the target at 60 yards. So I like the last 2 pins being smaller, but I bought this one because I said, no, I'm going to just try to run 19 thousandths pins in this setup and see how I do. Like, as far as, I know that I may not get the pinpoint accuracy, but there also has to do something with the amount of pin float that you can see. If it's a bigger blob out in the distance, you tend to be a little bit more okay with the pin float. Whereas if it's really small, it looks like it's all kind of crazy and jittery. So I'm always messing around. That was just a thing that I wanted to try out. Another interesting thing about this one is the way it mounts to the bow. So this is a different type of mount, that it's got a Picatinny rail like, they use on rifles and handguns, that mounts to the front of the riser of the bow rather than to the side. And then you crank it down with the mount here so that you can disconnect this entire thing, put it in your bag, when I was flying with it, I took it apart and put it in there. And then in theory, you can put the thing back together and you can actually put an Allen wrench in here and crank it down. And I was talking to the Hoyt rep while I was on site. He said that one of their first concerns was basically the repeatability of being able to take this off and put it back on. And Excel said that it's good to within 1/1000th of an inch as far as how tight they can get this thing. So I will admit, the first 2 times I took it off and put it back on, it did not hit in the same spot. And I looked at the thing, nothing seemed loose, but the third time when I came back from Colorado and put it on, I think I did an Instagram live video of it, it was hitting basically exactly where it should have been. So I'm going to just say that it was me. Further testing will occur because I can't imagine what the variance would have been like other than just me being a dumbass and maybe having mounted it, up or down on the Picatinny rail somehow. I know I didn't do that, but let's just hope that this is a solid setup. Overall, I like the scope. Unlike the black gold, I don't really, once it's up and going, I don't have to have an Allen wrench to mess with anything minor. So like I can undo this here. I can move this thing up and down for my slider, and then I can just hunker it down with my thumb. If I want to move this left and right, I undo this little clippy dude here, twist this thing around. I'm not going to do it because it's still dialed in, and that'll move the housing left and right. It's pretty solid. So I've been pretty impressed. Hello. It's getting windy out. I think we're supposed to get a storm. So I've got a sight tape on this that'll go to 150 yards, and I can actually shoot it. Like I can actually get the distance. I kind of had to monkey around with the sight a little bit to try to get it to work out so that I could get that much travel in the scope and for it to work, because I'm kind of playing with my peep height a little bit. The more you push the peep up, the more distance, the more range you're going to get. But basically what I ended up with is when this scope is all the way up, like almost bottomed out at the top, my 60 pin is almost as low as it can be inside the housing sitting on top of that bubble. So I dialed that in at 60, and I knew that that was going to give me the most amount of clearance possible. So I'm not shooting 50, 40, 30, 20. I went to 60, which is the last pin that I wanted in there. And I sat that thing straight down on the bubble, and then I worked the housing to basically figure out where that was going to be. I think if you do this, you may get some variance, like at the top. It may not be all the way down, or it may not be all the way locked at the top. It may be, somewhere a little bit down in here. But overall, I think you're going to be in like the top quarter of the rail. And that's going to give you the most amount of clearance that you can possibly get. So then I walked forward to my 50, and then I actually, adjusted the pin inside the housing, adjusted the 40 pin, adjusted the 30 pin, adjusted the 20 pin, so that I knew that in the first position that this thing was sitting at, I could run it all the way back up to the top of the bar, set the marker on 60, and I know that my 60, 50, 40, 30, 20 are all money. And that's kind of home base for this housing, right here at the top. So then what I have is I've got 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 20, 30, 40, 50 on my sight tape that I'm actually using to stick onto the rail here. So after I get this housing all set up with 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, and I know that basically it's set up as high as it can possibly be on the bar, then I start running it down and I figure out how much clearance I can get. I've not put a sight tape on at this point in time. What I'm doing is I take a blank piece of tape and I start putting marks on there as I'm backing up. So I'm getting 70 relatively close. And I literally take a yellow piece of tape, stretch it across the matrix target, put it on there so I can see it. Back up 70. Okay, cool. Still got clearance. Run it down. 80. Still got clearance. Cool. Back it down. 90. 100. 110. Still got clearance. And as I'm getting close to where I believe I'm going to get contact, what I do is I take the arrow and I flip the cock vane, which is normally straight up. I flip it under. This system works well enough to get out of the way, and these vanes are small enough that I'm using that I can run this basically any way I want, and the arrow clears the rest with no issues. And obviously I was testing that out to make sure that all the arrows were able to clear. But that allows me to basically get those last two fletchings. So let's say the cock vein's down, and those last two fletchings just sail directly under the housing as it's exiting the bow. I printed the sight tape off of Archer's Advantage. It's like $12 a year, super cheap. And if you're going to be doing this kind of thing, it's awesome. They make you take a bunch of measurements off the bow. They ask for the manufacturer, and then they make you chrono the bow. Like you'll have to chronograph to get as accurate as you possibly can. And then they'll print you out 3 different sight tapes. So my chrono hit 304 consistently with this arrow. So 304 feet per second. They gave me 303, 304, and 305, and 304 was money. Literally, put that thing on there, lined. I ran this back up to the top, put the 60 exactly where it should have been, ran the tape on the 60, stuck it down with my finger, walked back to 100, shot a group at 100. It was money, backed up to 120. It was money, walked back to 140, as good as I can get it. So I was super impressed with just kind of the engineering that goes behind the website, that they can just kind of understand what I've got and make it work. This is really cool. It's like magic. I went against a lot of people's advice, like Dan with Elk Shape, and I noticed that probably Dudley is shooting hunting arrows as well. I like new arrows. Like, I like to tinker and I like to mess with stuff. And this one, for me, wasn't about making sure that my hunting rig was set up, because I want to do that again. So what I wanted to do was buy new arrows that I don't use for hunting, and I wanted to try them out. So while I was in Washington, I went to Spokane Valley and bought a dozen of these Victory 3D HV, which they're basically a super lightweight. Like, I think they're like 6.8 grains per inch, which is really, really light for a 300 spine arrow. I bought some 150 grain target tips. Oh, is she all coming down? So these target tips aren't like the inserts or outserts that we're used to using for hunting. It's basically a solid piece of metal that you can break off different weights as you're going back in here. But I maxed them out, 150 grains up front, put glue down the entire side, spun them in, got them nice and tight in here. Cut these arrows down on my arrow cutting machine. I'll go more into depth on how I'm getting the exact length of what I want to get to, but there's some time that goes into it. These have like a little knock bushing at the end. It's designed so that if you're stacking arrows, like if other people are hitting it, it's going to break the knock, but it's not going to demolish the arrow. So I'll actually be able to reuse the arrow in theory afterwards. Although people hitting my arrow was not a problem. Me shooting my arrow into rocks at TAC, that was more of an issue. And then I use boning shield vanes, which are a really low profile. I did 3 of them with a 3-degree offset. So a little bit of spin, but then I just really took my time making sure that, like, bear shafts, these were really good, out to about 30. And to be honest, I couldn't get them perfect. Like, I probably needed these to be just a little bit stiffer. Maybe I could have taken 25 off of the front and got these to go just a little bit better bear shaft. But I was shooting great groups at distance with these, so I felt confident that this was going to be a super solid arrow for me. The only problem with these is they're not really hyper durable. So as I was messing with stuff, because I'm literally walking like up to 20, back to 100, up to 60, back to 120, like I'm just messing around as I'm thinking through things. So every once in a while, I forget to set this thing and I just lob one of these suckers like over the target or under the target. And if you do that, the odds are this arrow is not going to make it. Like, Victory makes the TKO and the TKO SS, like, they make some durable, tough arrows. These are not they. These are not a hunting arrow. This is something that is designed to fly really, really well, but it's not designed for durability. I ended up having MFJJ overnight me another dozen because I was freaking out because I was down to 6. And while I would have made it through the first TAC with my 6 arrows, I didn't want to run because in 2 weeks I'm going out to Park City. So that's the arrow. Another thing about TAC that I found interesting this year was there was a lot of really steep, long downhill shots, like the knock-on and the prime course. We were stretching out. And I didn't quite trust my tape. So what I wish I would have done was I wish that I would have sat on site, and they had matrix targets that were at different distances. So that's what I'm used to shooting at. So I know those dots. I know exactly how that's going to feel, rather than me shooting it just like a vague 3D animal at 60 yards. If I would have shot the dots on the matrix and really made sure that my 60 was perfect, like my 60 and my 50 probably were exactly where I wanted them to be, because the change in elevation coming from Tennessee going to Colorado, I just always felt like I wasn't 100% confident with this thing. And then another thing that I lacked confidence in was my rangefinder. I have a Leupold RX3, which is a great rangefinder, and it's close. The Buffalo on the prime course was like 120 yards-ish, and I felt so good about that shot. Like, I still remember what that pin was resting exactly where it should have been, and I let the arrow go, and the arrow lands about 8 to 12 inches under. And I know that it's because I should have messed with the cut chart a little bit more and learned how to use the cut chart with the rangefinder a little bit better. Make sure that I'm comfortable with my rangefinder and the cut chart so that I can confidently say, no, I'm 100% positive the bow is dialed. I know the arrows are dialed. Everything is money. It is 100% on me now to make these shots. So another interesting thing that happened on day one, I show up, and my release, my favorite release that I've ever used for a thumb, is the Stan Perfects. I bought this release a couple of times because I've lost the first one and then I've got it back. Love this release, and I had left it at the cabin. But luckily, in my emergency repair kit, I keep a backup release in here, and it's not a Perfects, but it's another Stan release that I'm comfortable with, and I know that they shoot the same way. Like, the arrows impact the same spot, which is important, because if you go from one kind of release to a different kind of release at 60 yards, they can literally impact like 6 inches off if the hooks open up a different way. That kind of threw off my game for the first time we were there. Like, the first day on the knock-on course, I didn't feel great at all. 2 days of hard traveling and probably some drinking the night before. I was real shaky, but it also helped me learn, like, the limitations of day one. If you're going to be in the mountains, Brandon, this is how you feel, and you should not be taking shots that are past a certain amount, because you know you're going to get to draw. And it seemed like no matter what I did, I could not get the shakes out. Not on day one. Day two, I felt a ton better. Day three, I felt even better. I learned a bunch about myself at TAC this year, just like I did the last time I went, to San Antonio, into Tennessee the year before that. So, super fun. I'm really looking forward to Park City. I just wanted to kind of go through the rig and tell you guys what I was shooting and why I was shooting it. Sit here and finish my beer. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Brandon McDonald.